Okay, Mr. Katzenberger.
Thank you, and thank you for coming tonight. Just a couple of questions. One, to turn to housing. So one of the requests that we've heard, and this is not just now, but over the last couple, for many years, is why doesn't UConn require freshmen, sophomores to live on campus as well? What is the reason for not allowing that? There's certainly educational benefits.
I think that it's not something that we would do, but we just haven't done it at this point. I think the issue would be that virtually all freshmen already live on campus. I think it's something like 96%, somewhere in that ballpark. And the vast majority of sophomores, north of 80%, they all choose to live on campus. And so it hasn't necessarily been necessary. Many of those people who aren't living on campus were also at home with their parents, too. They're not necessarily out in apartments or single-family homes. But it's not something we've ruled out.
Pardon?
It's not something we've ruled out.
And the other question is, with assuming that the Mansfield apartments become, taken down, torn down, whether for hotel or whatever else, what's the number of beds? I know that's been reported, number that would be lost, and what are the plans to make up that? That's mostly graduate or young faculty, or
no? Those are undergrad beds. I think it's about 270 or 275, if I remember off the top of my head. About 100 of those individuals can be absorbed by the Nathan Hale Inn when that becomes 100% dorm. Right now it's 50%. And then the remaining students can be housed elsewhere in existing housing. And so, as we talk about a lot, housing is elastic. If you have to house 12,000 students, we can do that. If we somehow had to house 13,000 students, we could do that. And so that number is fairly easily absorbed into our existing space. There's not a set number of beds in every dorm or a set number of beds on campus.
Thanks.
Okay, Mr. Shaken.
I have a series of questions.
Go ahead, Mr. Sargent. I saw your hand, but you had already spoken, so I have to call on new members.
I have a series of questions. I think some of them are fairly simple. Just to that point about the Mansfield apartment beds. I think when you have a housing ecosystem like exists on campus, you're right that housing is an elastic thing, but it's not as elastic when it comes to our housing stock here in town. And so I think that when we are looking at growth in student population, and I have a couple questions about that in a second, and the proportional bed growth that's happened over the years, we haven't seen a sort of proportional housing growth in Mansfield besides a spurt across the street. And so I just was hoping you could speak a little bit to what we've been working with on the council and in Mansfield, and what I know you have on Town Gown, with some of the issues that have been coming up in our neighborhoods, and how you think that that's been going since you were last here, which was about a year ago, I think.
Is there some specific particular issue you'd like me to address, or just speak generally? I'm not sure where you're...
I have some specific questions, but yeah, why don't just generally, you were here, I think, last March. We had a spirited conversation about it as a council. We've been working with it as a council at the same time that you and John Armstrong have. And so are there any highlights and progress that has happened over the last year that'd be helpful for me on your end?
Well, I think our staff, in the form of John Armstrong, has been working very closely with town staff. I know that John and a town staff member attended the International Town Gown Relations Conference, and issues like the issues we're dealing with are very much at the forefront of their discussions. If there were a simple solution to the problem that you're trying to get at, there's a lot of smart people over the years who probably would have thought of it. I don't think there are simple solutions, and so there's a burden on the town to address it. There's a burden on the university to do whatever we're able to do, but I don't think there's any silver bullet. So I think the discussions have been good as we've explored different solutions and possibilities, but I don't think that either the town or the university has reached a point where we believe that what we're trying to get at has been addressed.
I have a question about, thank you, and thanks for that answer. I have a question about fraternities and sororities specifically. We had a tragic event in town that involved a fraternity party over the last school year, and through that, I think through some conversations that we had subsequently with our resident state troopers, we learned about some of the things that that go on with fraternity and sorority parties, registration of them with the Office of Fraternity and Sorority Life. I think the other thing is that we as a council have learned that when you look across the spectrum of rental properties in Mansfield, the ones that we seem to have frequent and recurring issues with are ones that are occupied by members of a fraternity or members of a sorority. And so, I understand that there's a system in place where a fraternity or sorority can register an event that they're having with the Office of Fraternity and Sorority Life, and tell them things like how many people are going to the party, and that kind of thing. And they have an internal system for making sure that things are happening lawfully there. People are being ID'd if they're going to be drinking, that kind of thing. Has the university considered sort of proactively sharing that registration list with our resident state trooper office and our police department so that we can proactively manage those parties before they start?
On that specific question, I'd have to get back to you because I'd want to talk to our staff first to see what discussions that they've had. I would say that if a fraternity or any student organization, I wouldn't necessarily say it's all Greek-led organizations. I think there are students who are good neighbors and who are not problematic, and students who are bad neighbors and are problematic. Their affiliation is kind of irrelevant. But when they come to us and say, we're going to host a party of 500 people, John Armstrong's role is to say, don't do that, and here's why you shouldn't do that, and here are the risks that you're taking. Can we force them not to do that? No, we can't. Addressing it after the fact, a lot of it depends on reports that we get. And so if there's an off-campus gathering that's disruptive and the state go there and it's dispersed and no one's charged anything or a citation is issued, that's one thing. If someone's charged with a crime and we get a police report that says here are the crime this individual who has been charged with, then we as a university can take action through our student code to address that. But again, that's after the fact rather than beforehand.
Okay, thanks. And I'll just say that I think our Sergeant Canoyer and our state trooper's office have had a lot of success working with John, for that matter, to address issues before they arise, whether it's going and knocking on doors at the beginning of the school year, sending letters out to landlords, out to students who are living in those houses. I think it would be very helpful, speaking just as myself, I don't know if Sergeant Canoyer agrees, but to have the information of where things have been pre-registered shared with him before, even if it's that afternoon before the event happens, so a state trooper might make a visit to that home before a party starts. I have an enrollment question, and so we're talking about a smaller freshman class coming in next year. The university is about to open up your new Hartford campus. I worked around the corner. It's very nice. I'm glad the construction's over because it's taken away all my parking going to Bears for lunch. But when I was a student there was a large number of folks who were admitted into one of the satellite campuses as freshmen who attended the satellite campuses for 2 years and then transferred into stores. Similarly, anyone who goes to a community college in the state of Connecticut who goes for 2 years or 3, many of them aspire to come into UConn and are guaranteed admission if they meet certain requirements for an associate's degree. So when we look at a class like this, how much do we see one of them grow when it gets to junior year?
It's a great question. So we do have students who come from our regional campuses to stores every year to the tune of about 1,000, but it's important to understand that there's an outward bound number as well. And I don't have that figure in particular off the top of my head, but students really kind of circulate among the UConn campuses. As an example, the Marine Sciences program has to be finished in Avery Point, can't be finished here in stores for obvious reasons due to our research vessel and things such as that. And we're finding that's increasingly the case with our Stanford campus as well, in financial risk program that's going on there. And we're expecting maybe see a little bit more of that with the Hartford campus. We do have students that are offered admission to the regional campuses that ultimately will come to stores. That does make up the bulk of the students that start at the regional campuses. We have a cohort of about it's been between 1,200 and 1,400 students who start at the regional campuses, though the retention and graduation rates are not what they are at stores. And so some of those students actually start with the intention of going to another university altogether when they start at the regional campus. One important note to point out is that about 90%, Mike mentioned that about 96% of our new freshmen live on campus. 90% of our new transfer students live on campus in stores. When I heard that stat the other day, I actually really raised my eyebrow because I thought that was very high. Our transfer students, by and large, are students who really probably would have opted to come to stores to begin with. We did not take them to stores because of capacity issues. We offered them a place to start at one of our regional campuses, or they started at a community college, as you point out, and they want, as a part of that college experience, to still live on campus, which is one of the reasons why that is so high.
I have quite a few questions of my own. My tendency is to let colleagues exhaust their questions before I recognize myself, and I will recognize Mr. Sargent again because I saw his hand. But I want to get some nomenclature straight. New transfers. There was a time before your time and before Mr. Kirk's time when there was a term used at UConn known as branchfer. That was not the same as a transfer. And if I'm looking at the number 850 for the fall of 17, does that include A, students who spent 2 years at the Greater Hartford campus and now come to stores, B, a student who went to UMass for a year or two and then comes to stores, or does that 850 include both?
So transfers, it's an important point of clarification. The transfer student population only includes students not coming from another UConn institution. The transfer term is not one that we usually use.
Yeah, I don't care for you. I don't care about the term. It's an old term from the 80s. So and not to interrupt you, but by gosh, if you have more students coming to stores, and that my hypothetical student who successfully completed 2 years at the Greater Hartford campus comes to where is he or she?
They're counted in the overall student population on the bottom line. So it's a part of the overall equation, of course, with our overall student enrollment. And so as you look at that, it's a piece of that. And then, as I said, the new student enrollment at our regional campus has not changed dramatically over time. It's usually been between 1,200 and 1,400 students over the past many years. And I think if you go as far back as 15 years ago, that is the case.
So they're in the so I get your answer. They're in the bottom line, but it's not. But the students who come up from a regional campus are not broken out the way the student from UMass is as a transfer or for obviously an incoming freshman.
Correct.
Okay. Now we got that straightened out. Mr. Sargent.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You mentioned about elasticity of housing on campus. And I remember just anecdotally when I was a student there, they mentioned something about converting study lounges to housing. Could you just go a little bit more into the nuts and bolts of that conversion? Are there any other examples that the university utilizes to make it more elastic, flexible, whatever the term is?
You can take a study lounge and make it into a quad. There's 4 students. You can take what was a single and make it a double, turn a double into a triple, take a space that's used for some other purpose and make it into student housing. So that's where the elasticity comes in.
And you mentioned when Mansfield apartments were removed, there would be a minus of about roughly 200 beds, and then you mentioned Nathan Hale as an increase of 100. Now that's assuming, though, that all those students would go to Nathan Hale, correct?
Well, we wouldn't be talking about those students. There would be a gap between the time that the Mansfield apartments close and when the Nathan Hale Inn becomes fully. So we wouldn't be there wouldn't be a student currently sitting in the Mansfield apartments who would then pack their bags and move to Nathan Hale. It would be overall of students coming into the university.
Okay.
During that semester.
And then my last question, thank you, Mr. Mayor, for your patience. If I'll recall, a while back they talked about closing the Torrington campus. Has there been any update on that, and will that impact enrollment in stores here at all? Thank you.
We have closed the Torrington campus. It's closed now, and I don't know about the impact.
Impact has been very minimal, if not even measurable at all. At the Stores campus, of the size of the incoming cohort, there was 60 students, so very minimal.
Mr.